Late into the night, behind courtroom doors, a war was brewing, not just between lawyers, but between power and truth. Rumors swirled that charges against Sean Diddy Combs had suddenly vanished. Social media erupted. Fans celebrated. Critics scoffed. But the reality, far more twisted than anyone expected. As prosecutors scrambled to rewrite the rules and the defense cried foul, one thing became clear. This case wasn't winding down, it was exploding. And what happened in that courtroom could change everything we thought we knew about one of hip-hop's biggest icons.
It started with a whisper.
Then it spread like wildfire. Early in the day, word began circulating that multiple charges against Diddy had been dropped. Some media outlets jumped on it, headlines flooded Twitter and Instagram. People assumed the worst, or maybe the best, depending on which side you were on. Was Diddy walking free? Had the government backed down? But here's the twist. None of it was true. The prosecution quickly stepped in, setting the record straight. Yes, some charges were being pulled from the jury instructions, but that didn't mean they were off the table. In fact, those very same charges were still being used as building blocks in a much bigger legal strategy. It was a game of semantics, and it worked. Confusion spread, and even veteran reporters covering the case were thrown off. And just like that, the trial wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about who could control the narrative. But that was only the beginning. What came next would shake the entire courtroom. Just when everyone thought the confusion had settled, the government dropped a bombshell. A formal letter announcing that charges like attempted kidnapping and arson were being removed from the jury instructions. It sounded like a win for the defense until you read the fine print. Those crimes weren't gone, they were just hiding in plain sight, reframed as predicate acts supporting the broader racketeering conspiracy charge. That meant the jury wouldn't be asked to decide on those charges directly, but they would still be used as evidence to prove something even more serious. That Diddy was at the center of a criminal enterprise. It was a risky move. Some called it strategic, others called it manipulative. But no matter how you sliced it, it created a legal gray area that could seriously sway the jury, especially if they didn't fully grasp the difference between being charged with a crime and having that same crime used to support a larger conspiracy. The defense, furious. The judge, treading carefully. The jury, likely more confused than ever. And that's when the defense made their next move, one that hinted at something even more dangerous than legal games. As tensions mounted, the defense asked for more time, claiming they hadn't been given a fair shot to review key documents. But this wasn't just a routine delay. They were hinting at something deeper, something constitutional. In front of a packed courtroom, Diddy's legal team argued that the shifting charges and last-minute changes could violate his right to a fair trial. They raised concerns about due process, claiming they were being blindsided by a prosecution that kept moving the goalposts. Some in the gallery rolled their eyes, calling it a stall tactic, a distraction meant to buy time and shake confidence in the prosecution's case. But others weren't so sure. If the defense could convince the judge that the government's changes were unfair or confusing enough, they could undermine the entire foundation of the racketeering charge. Suddenly, this wasn't just a fight about evidence, it was a fight about the rules of the game itself. And if the rules weren't clear, the jury might never find their way through the chaos. But the real war was just heating up, and it centered on the one charge that could send Diddy away for decades. This was the moment everything centered around, the racketeering conspiracy charge. To the average person, it sounds like something out of a mob movie, but in this courtroom, it was dead serious and incredibly complicated. The prosecution argued that Diddy didn't need to physically commit every act. All they had to prove was that he helped orchestrate them, that he was the mastermind behind a network of illegal activity. Their theory? Diddy ran a loose but deliberate operation involving manipulation, control, and fear, and the crimes, from forced labor to trafficking, were all just pieces of that puzzle. But the defense hit back hard. They claimed the government was trying to stretch the definition of conspiracy beyond recognition. According to them, this wasn't organized crime. It was a messy mix of business, personal relationships, and bad decisions, but not a criminal enterprise. At the heart of the debate was one simple but devastating question. Did Diddy knowingly operate a system of abuse, or was he being painted as the villain in a complex, high-profile story? The judge had to rule on dozens of objections in real time, each one potentially reshaping how the jury understood the case. And with every word, the stakes got higher. But behind all the legal jargon and courtroom tension lurked the darkest accusations yet. Behind every conspiracy charge are the so-called predicate crimes, the acts that prove the larger scheme existed. And in this case, those allegations were nothing short of disturbing. The prosecution laid out a chilling pattern: forced labor, obstruction of justice, even threats to silence potential witnesses. They claimed that people inside Diddy's world weren't just working, they were trapped, controlled, intimidated, and when someone tried to speak out or leave, things got dangerous. But the defense was ready. They argued that this wasn't some underground operation, it was a celebrity empire, chaotic at times, sure, but not criminal. They slammed the government's case for relying on vague definitions and circumstantial evidence. Their boldest claim, that prosecutors were inventing a conspiracy that didn't exist, all to make headlines and score a win. And then came the real debate: obstruction. The government didn't even try to prove there was an ongoing federal investigation at the time of the alleged cover-ups. That didn't sit well with the defense, who argued it was pure speculation and dangerously misleading for the jury. The result? A legal tug-of-war over the truth, and with every detail revealed, the jury's job became more impossible. But nothing stirred the courtroom more than the next accusation, the one everyone had been dreading. This was the moment the courtroom grew tense. The prosecution shifted the focus to the most explosive allegation yet: sex trafficking. And they weren't pulling any punches. Their argument was crystal clear. Trafficking isn't just about cages and physical force, it's about control, manipulation, psychological dominance. They painted a picture of young women brought into Diddy's orbit, promised glamour and opportunity, only to find themselves trapped in something far more sinister. They claimed these women weren't free to leave, that their consent was murky at best, because when power, influence, and fear are involved, consent becomes complicated. But the defense hit back with fire. They argued that many of the encounters being described were consensual, and that using past relationships to frame current accusations was unfair and misleading. According to them, the prosecution was twisting emotional regrets into criminal charges. The legal debate turned surgical. Was physical restraint necessary to prove trafficking, or could emotional pressure and fear qualify? No clear answer. And that's exactly what made this part of the case so dangerous and so divisive. By the end of the day, the jury wasn't just deciding what happened, they were being asked to define the very meaning of coercion, consent, and power. And just when the courtroom seemed to settle into its final rhythm, a last-minute change shook everything once again. In court, every word matters, and nowhere was that clearer than in the fight over how to describe the transportation charges. The prosecution pushed hard to use the phrase acts of prostitution instead of labeling the women as sex workers. It might sound like a subtle difference, but in a trial like this, phrasing shapes perception. By framing it this way, the government aimed to portray the women as victims caught in a cycle of exploitation rather than willing participants in the sex trade. It was a strategic win that strengthened their narrative of coercion and control. The defense argued this was just semantics, trying to twist language to fit a predetermined story. But the judge sided with the prosecution, allowing the more loaded wording. This small victory may seem minor outside the courtroom, but for the jury it's a powerful nudge, a reminder that this case is about exploitation, not choice. With the language battle settled, all eyes turned toward the final moments of the trial. As the trial neared its end, both sides fought over timing, but not just in the usual way. The defense pushed to delay their closing arguments, aiming to present them when the jury would be at their sharpest. It was a calculated move, designed to maximize impact and buy a bit of breathing room. The government pushed back hard, warning that any delay risked losing momentum and potentially weakening their case in the jury's eyes. Judges and lawyers haggled late into the night, each side refusing to give ground. Eventually, a compromise was struck, but the tension didn't ease. Both camps knew this was their final chance to shape the narrative before the jury disappeared behind closed doors to decide Diddy's fate. The courtroom was electric, lawyers pacing, witnesses awaiting the outcome, and the jurors caught in the eye of a storm they couldn't escape. Every word from the closing arguments would now carry immense weight. The trial's future, and possibly Diddy's, hinged on what was said next. And as the jury prepared to deliberate, one question loomed large. How much would the jury buy into the tangled web of legal battles, emotional testimonies, and strategic maneuvers? This trial isn't just headlines and celebrity drama, it's a high-stakes battle over power, truth, and control. From confusing jury instructions to last-minute legal maneuvers, every twist has shaped the story into something far more complex than anyone expected. Sean "Diddy" Combs faces charges that could change his life forever. But beyond the courtroom, the case forces us to question how justice works when fame, influence, and hidden truths collide. As the jury retreats to deliberate, one thing is clear: the outcome could send shockwaves far beyond this trial. And whether you believe in Diddy's innocence or guilt, the story is far from over. What do you think will happen next? Drop your thoughts below, because this case is only getting started.